The air in the bank was cold and smelled of clean money and recycled air. It was a sterile, quiet place. The kind of place where life's biggest decisions are reduced to signatures on a dotted line. I sat across from a man named Jim, the branch manager. He had kind eyes, but today they were filled with professional concern. My hands were folded neatly in my lap, my posture as straight and unyielding as the marble columns outside. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice low and gentle. "I just want to be absolutely certain. This is a wire transfer for $30,000. Once we cancel the request, it's final. Reissuing it would require a new process." I met his gaze without flinching. My own voice, when it came, sounded distant, as if it belonged to someone else. It was unnervingly calm. "I understand. Jim, please, cancel it." He hesitated, tapping his pen on the file in front of him. "Is everything all right?" This was for the wedding venue, wasn't it? I offered him a small, tight smile that didn't reach my eyes. It was a mask I had perfected over decades. The smile of a woman holding everything together. "Circumstances have changed," I said simply. He nodded slowly, sensing he shouldn't press further. He turned to his computer, and his fingers began to click on the keyboard, the sound echoing in the silence between us. Each click was a small, sharp severance, a cord being cut, a promise being withdrawn. Most people would have been shaking, or crying, or filled with a rage that made their vision blur. But I felt nothing but a profound, chilling clarity. It was the kind of clarity that comes after the storm has passed, when you're left standing in the wreckage and realize you survived. But to understand how a 59-year-old woman, a mother, ends up sitting in a bank, calmly taking back the money meant to build her daughter's dream wedding, we have to go back. Just 1 week. 1 week ago, my life was as predictable and comforting as the sunrise over the flat Ohio landscape. My name is Helen Miller. I'm 59, a widow for nearly 15 years, and an office manager at a small law firm downtown. It's not a glamorous job, but it's stable. And stability was the one thing I craved, the one thing I fought to give my children after my husband, Tom, died suddenly, leaving me with a mountain of grief and 2 teenagers to raise. My world revolved around them. Ashley, my daughter, who just turned 32, and Luke, my son, at 29. They were my reason for everything. For every extra shift I picked up, every vacation I postponed, every time I mended my old coat instead of buying a new one. I spent the better part of my adult life ensuring they would never know the sharp sting of scarcity that I had known. I wanted their lives to be smooth, paved with opportunities one never had. And for the most part, I had succeeded. Luke was a high school history teacher, married to a wonderful woman, and they were talking about starting a family. And Ashley was my bright, shining star. She had a high-powered marketing job in the city and was engaged to a man named Preston, who came from a family with a name that people recognized. They were planning a spectacular wedding, the kind you see in magazines. Last Tuesday, my world was still whole. I remember the morning clearly, the soft light filtering through the kitchen window, the familiar scent of brewing coffee, the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I was thinking about the wedding. I'd already given Ashley $20,000 to help with the initial costs, the deposit on the stunning historical manor, the photographer she'd been following on Instagram since college, the florist who could work magic with peonies. Seeing her so happy, so excited, was worth every penny. It was the culmination of my life's work, watching my daughter step into a life of security and happiness. I was sitting at my kitchen table, smiling to myself as I pictured her walking down the aisle, when my laptop pinged with a new email. I glanced at the screen. The sender was Ashley. The subject line was blank, just her name sitting there in my inbox. I smiled, thinking it was probably a quick update. A photo of a centerpiece she was considering. Or just a sweet message before her big day. We had talked about the wedding plans just a few weeks before. And everything seemed perfect. Clicked it open. The smile still on my face. And then, the smile disappeared. Mom. It began. Not hi mom. Or dearest mom. Just the label. Mom. The email explained, in a series of detached, carefully worded sentences, that she and Preston, along with his family, had finalized the guest list for the ceremony, and, after much consideration, they had decided it would be for the best if I watched the wedding via live stream instead of attending in person. She added that Preston's mother was very particular about numbers and wanted to keep the event intimate. To the end, a line was included that felt like a physical blow. If you want to be a part of it, you can watch on the Google Meet link we set up. It'll be just like you're there. LOL. LOL. Laughing out loud. As if disinviting your own mother from your wedding was a funny little hiccup. A joke. I stared at the screen for a long time. My coffee went cold in my mug. My hands didn't tremble. I didn't cry. Strange. Hollow numbness spread through me, silencing the frantic beat of my heart. My first thought wasn't anger. It was shame. A hot, searing shame that flooded my cheeks. What did I do wrong? The question echoed in the sudden emptiness of my mind. Did I say something at the engagement party? Am I not sophisticated enough for the Davenports? Is my simple, quiet life an embarrassment to her now? I read the email again. And again. The words didn't change. They were as cold and final as a locked door. Each word, consideration, best, intimate, was a sterile, corporate-sounding excuse designed to soften a brutal message. But there was no softness. There was only the sharp, clean cut of rejection. I thought about all the years. The fevers I stayed up all night to break. The scraped knees I kissed better. The science projects I helped build at midnight. The hours I spent listening to her cry over boyfriends who broke her heart. The money I'd scraped together for her first apartment. For her master's degree. For the car she needed to get to her first real job. I had been there for every fall. Every triumph. Every tear. I was the foundation upon which she had built this shiny, successful life. And now, that foundation was being told to watch from a distance, through a screen, because I didn't fit into the picture-perfect image of her new life. I wasn't an honored guest. I was a logistical problem that had been solved with a Google Meet link and an LOL. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The words were caught in my throat, tangled up with 32 years of memories. I closed the laptop, the soft click sounding like a gavel falling. I mechanically finished my cold coffee, the bitter taste a perfect match for the feeling in my gut. I got up, washed my mug, and got ready for work as if it were any other Tuesday. But it wasn't. It was the day the ground beneath my feet had fractured. It was the day I stopped pretending that my sacrifices were anything more than a debt that had finally been paid in full. The day everything started to change. The drive to the office that morning was silent. The early spring air still carried a chill, but I barely noticed it. My mind was a whirlwind, spinning around the same question. How did we get here? I had spent 18 years working at the same law firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. And steady was everything I needed after Tom died. When the kids were still teenagers. I remember standing in front of our old washing machine, bills spread across the counter, trying to figure out how to pay for both groceries and Ashley's college application fees. Back then, I didn't think twice about giving up my weekends. I took on extra shifts, canceled vacations, let my own birthdays pass by unnoticed. There will be time for me later. I used to tell myself, but later never came. Every penny I saved went to Ashley and Luke. When Ashley changed her major twice and needed extra credits, I paid for them. When she moved across the country for a job that didn't last, I paid for the deposit and the plane ticket. When she cried over her second big breakup at 27, I flew out there, held her hand, and made her tea in a kitchen that didn't feel like home. And when Luke wanted to buy a house with his fiancée, I co-signed the loan and wrote the first $10,000 check without hesitation. I never kept a tally. That's what mothers do, right? But that email made me feel like a transaction. Like I had served my purpose and was no longer needed. Like I had an expiration date. And it had just passed. Back at the office, my boss, David, walked past my desk. He's one of those rare men who remembers your birthday and how you take your coffee. He noticed right away that something was wrong. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Helen," he said, placing a latte from the coffee shop downstairs on my desk. A wave of emotion threatened to overwhelm me. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to say, my daughter just uninvited me from her wedding. I wanted to shatter the calm facade and just weep. But instead, I forced that familiar, tight smile and said I hadn't slept well. He didn't push. He just nodded and went back to his office. That small gesture of kindness, the coffee, the unspoken understanding almost broke me. After all the noise in my head that morning, it was a quiet reminder that I still existed, that I still mattered, even in a small way. The latte was warm in my hands, a stark contrast to the ice that had formed around my heart. And in that contrast, something shifted. The hollow feeling of shame began to recede, replaced by something else. It wasn't loud or explosive. It was a quiet, cold resolve hardening in my gut. It was the first inkling of a thought that I hadn't allowed myself to have in 30 years. Maybe, just maybe, this isn't about what I did wrong. Maybe this is about what she did. Around lunchtime, my phone buzzed on the desk. Ashley again. Her name lit up the screen like a spotlight I didn't want to be under. A voicemail notification appeared. Then a series of texts. "Mom, please pick up. We need to talk. This isn't funny." I didn't answer. Not yet. I just sat there, sipping the latte David had bought me. And I thought, maybe it's time to stop being the one who always answers. Maybe it's time to stop playing a role in someone else's story, especially when they won't even let you on the stage. That afternoon, staring at the unopened messages on my phone, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry or beg. I was going to do something much more powerful. I was going to act. After work, I didn't drive straight home. The route was so ingrained in me that I almost turned onto my street out of pure muscle memory. But at the last second, I kept my hand steady on the wheel and continued straight. My destination was just a few blocks from the office, the main branch of the Ohio Savings Bank. It was a solid, old brick building that projected an air of reliability. Inside, the manager, Jim, had helped me with everything over the years, from setting up college funds when the kids were little to adjusting my retirement contributions. He always greeted me by name, Mrs. Miller. He'd say with a warm, genuine smile. That day was no different. He saw me walk in and stood up from his desk to shake my hand. "Helen, good to see you. What can I do for you today?" I sat down in the chair opposite him and placed my purse on the floor. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching myself in a movie. My voice, when I spoke, was the same one I'd heard in my head all day, calm, steady, almost unnaturally so. "I need to inquire about a wire transfer I scheduled." He nodded, pulling up my account on his screen. "Of course. The one for the wedding venue? Ashley must be so excited. It's all coming together." His cheerful words were like tiny pinpricks against my raw nerves, but my expression didn't change. "That's the one," I said. "I need to cancel it." He blinked, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Cancel it?" He repeated, as if he hadn't heard me correctly. "Mrs. Miller, there may be a cancellation fee depending on the timing. May I ask the reason?" I chose my words carefully, avoiding the messy, emotional truth. Circumstances have changed. It was a vague, corporate-sounding phrase, just like the ones in Ashley's email. Felt fitting. He typed something. His brow furrowed in concentration. The silence stretched. "Well," he said, looking up with a hint of surprise. "You're in luck. It was scheduled to be processed tomorrow morning. It hasn't gone through yet. It was a close call." He paused, then looked at me, his professional demeanor softening into genuine concern. "Are you sure about this, Helen? $30,000 is a significant amount." $30,000. That was the next installment I had planned to send, on top of the $20,000 already paid. A total of $50,000 for a wedding I wasn't allowed to attend. A wedding I was supposed to watch on a laptop screen, like a stranger. The absurdity of it all hit me with such force that it almost made me laugh. I nodded, my resolve hardening into steel. "I'm sure." He printed out the necessary forms, and I signed my name on the line. The ink was dark and final. I slid the paper back across the desk and stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years. As I walked out of the bank and into the late afternoon sun, I didn't look back. When I got home, the little red light on my answering machine was blinking furiously. 9 missed calls from Ashley. 2 from Luke. I pressed the play button. The first message was from Ashley, her voice tight with annoyance. "Mom, seriously? Call me back. This is childish." The next was Luke. "Mom, Ash is freaking out. Just call her. Whatever is going on, you guys can work it out." The last one was just Ashley's voice, cracking with a frustration that was beginning to border on panic. "Mom, please, don't do this." "Don't do what?" I thought. "Don't respect your decision? Don't accept the boundaries you've so clearly drawn?" I unplugged the machine from the wall. In the kitchen, I went straight to the pantry and retrieved the bottle of red wine I had been saving for Christmas Day. Ashley was supposed to visit, but she'd canceled at the last minute. "Work," she'd said vaguely over the phone. I hadn't opened it then. I opened it now. I poured a generous glass and took it out to the back porch. I sat down on the old wicker chair, the one Tom and I had bought at a flea market our first year of marriage. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. The neighborhood birds were singing their evening songs. The neighbor's dog barked a friendly hello. Everything seemed so normal, so peaceful. And yet, everything had changed. As I sipped the wine, the memories came, not in a painful flood, but in a slow, steady tide. I thought of all the birthday parties I planned by myself after Tom was gone, trying to make the day feel special even with the gaping hole his absence left. I thought of all the holiday dinners where I pretend I wasn't waiting for a phone call that never came. I remembered every small, invisible sacrifice. The new shoes I didn't buy for myself so Ashley could have the brand-name sneakers all her friends were wearing. The clunky old car I drove for 18 years so she and Luke could have a reliable one to share. The trip to Italy I dreamed of, postponed year after year because there was always a tuition bill, a security deposit, or a plane ticket for one of them that was more important. I thought of Preston's mother, Mrs. Davenport, a woman I had met only twice, a woman who barely knew me, yet whose opinion apparently carried more weight than mine, a woman whose idea of an intimate family meant excluding the only person who had carried Ashley through every single difficult phase of her life. I thought of the way Ashley had ended the email, with that casual, dismissive LOL, as if watching your own daughter get married on a screen was a source of amusement, a funny little anecdote for her to share with her new, sophisticated friends. And finally, for the first time in a long, long time, I thought about myself, not as a mother, not as a widow, but as Helen. What did Helen want? The answer came to me with a startling clarity that cut through the haze of wine and sorrow. I wanted peace. I wanted dignity. I wanted a life that didn't revolve around being useful to people who only showed up when they needed something. It was almost 9 o'clock when the doorbell rang. I considered ignoring it, but a flicker of curiosity got the better of me. I opened the door to find Luke standing on my porch. He was still in his work clothes, his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. He looked uncomfortable, clutching his phone in one hand like it was a shield. "Mom," he said, stepping inside before I could even speak. "Why aren't you answering your phone? Ashley's losing her mind." I closed the door calmly. "Hello to you. Too, Luke." He sighed, already pacing back and forth in my small entryway. "She said you told her you're not coming to the wedding anymore. That you're being difficult." I let out a short, humorless laugh. Difficult? For not attending a wedding I was uninvited from? He shifted his weight, his eyes avoiding mine. It was a look I knew well. It was the look he got when he was caught between his loyalty to his sister and what he knew was right. "Look, Preston's parents are paying for most of it. You know how traditional they are." I raised an eyebrow. Traditional? I've already paid $20,000. I was about to give her $30,000 more. That's not tradition, Luke. That's a down payment. He froze, his pacing stopping abruptly. "Wait, you were going to give her another $30,000? Was?" I said, taking a sip of my wine. "Not anymore." Luke's face paled. "Mom, they're counting on that money. The venue, the caterer. That's what Ashley was calling about. The payment for the venue didn't go through." "That's no longer my problem," I replied, my voice firm. His own voice rose, laced with disbelief and frustration. "Of course it's your problem. She's your daughter. And I am her mother," I said quietly, setting my glass down. A mother who was told to stay home and watch on a screen. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly agitated. He was trying to mediate, to smooth things over, just like he always did. He was the peacemaker, the one who hated conflict. But this time, the peace he was trying to keep came at my expense. "You always do this," Luke accused, his voice sharp with a frustration that had clearly been building. "You always turn everything into something about you." And that was it. That was the moment. The tiny hairline fracture that had formed that morning finally split wide open. For years, I had absorbed their selfishness, their thoughtlessness, their casual disregard, and I had reframed it as my own failing. I wasn't doing enough. I wasn't understanding enough. I wasn't enough. But hearing that accusation from my own son, while I was standing in the house I had held together for them with my bare hands, something inside me finally broke. But it didn't break into a million pieces. It broke into two. The old Helen and the new one. "Get out of my house." He stared at me. "What?" "You heard me, Luke. Get out." My voice wasn't loud, but it was serene, filled with an authority he had never heard from me before. "I have given you both everything I have. I have built my entire life around your happiness, and I am done. I am done being the villain in a story I wrote with love." Luke stood there for a second longer, his mouth slightly open, a look of utter shock on his face. Then, he turned and left. The front door clicked shut behind him. It was a soft sound, but in the sudden, ringing silence of the house, it sounded louder than a slam. I stood in the middle of the living room, my heart hammering against my ribs, and I realized something astonishing. I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. The next morning, I woke up to 43 missed calls and a string of frantic texts from Ashley. They had started with passive-aggressive guilt trips. "Mom, we need to talk. Why are you doing this? This is so childish." Then, as the night wore on and the reality of the financial situation set in, the tone changed. "The venue just called. The payment didn't process. We're going to lose everything if we don't pay by tomorrow. Preston's parents are furious." They said this proves they were right about you. At 1:24 in the morning, she had sent a final, desperate message. I don't understand why you're doing this to me. I smiled into my coffee. Of course she didn't understand. Ashley had grown up with my sacrifices stitched so seamlessly into the fabric of her life that she never had to wonder where the comfort, the security, the stability came from. She just assumed it would always be there. That I would always be there. But not this time. Later that morning, as I was reviewing contracts at my desk, an email popped into my personal inbox. The subject line was a plea. Please don't ruin my wedding. I opened it without any real expectation. My heart a calm, steady rhythm in my chest. Mom, she wrote. The word still felt like a label. But now it was one tinged with desperation. I know you're upset about the livestream situation, but this is extreme. We've lost the deposit on the venue. And if we don't pay the rest of the balance by the end of the day Paris time, the caterer is going to drop us. Preston's parents are absolutely livid. They're saying this just proves you're unreasonable. Please, don't do this. We can talk about you coming to the ceremony, but we need the money first. There it was, laid bare in black and white. We can talk about you coming. Not we were wrong. Not I'm so sorry. Not how could I have been so cruel. It was a negotiation. My presence at my own daughter's wedding was a bargaining chip. Something to be bought and sold depending on my immediate generosity. My love, my role as her mother, had been assigned a clear monetary value. And apparently, the price was $30,000. I didn't reply. I closed the email and went back to my work. The words on the contract in front of me sharp and clear. For the first time in days, my mind felt uncluttered. The fog of hurt and confusion had lifted, replaced by a stark, cold certainty. The path ahead was no longer murky. It was illuminated by the harsh light of truth. Near noon, David appeared at my desk. Lunch? He suggested. A gentle smile on his face. That new Italian place just opened down the street. My treat. My first instinct, the one honed by years of habit, was to refuse. To say I had too much work. Or that I'd brought a sandwich from home. I had always made myself small. Kept to myself. Never wanting to be a bother. But something in me had changed. Maybe it was the clarity of the last 24 hours. Or maybe I just wanted to sit in a place that demanded nothing from me. So, I nodded. I'd like that very much. Over plates of pasta, he talked about his grandchildren, about how exhausting but wonderful it was to chase them around the park. His eyes were soft, his words genuine. He spoke of a life filled with a simple, messy, unconditional love. He paused, stirring his iced tea, and then he looked at me, his expression kind. Forgive me for saying so, Helen, but you seem lighter today. I was surprised at myself. The words just came out. A quiet torrent of everything I had been holding inside. I told him everything. About Ashley. The email. The live stream. The money. I told him about the sleepless night. The confrontation with Luke. And the decision I had made at the bank. I laid it all out on the table between our breadsticks and marinara sauce. When I finished, my voice trembling just slightly at the end, he didn't judge me. He didn't offer easy platitudes or try to fix it. He just listened. Then he reached across the table and briefly squeezed my hand. Sometimes, he said, his voice full of a quiet wisdom, the hardest part of love is setting a boundary, especially with the people we've given the most to. He took a sip of his tea. For what it's worth, Helen, I think you did the right thing. And for the first time, hearing it from someone else, I truly believed it too. A weight I didn't even realize I had been carrying for 30 years lifted from my shoulders. It was the weight of unspoken expectations, of thankless giving, of constantly putting myself last. When I returned to my desk, my phone showed more missed calls, more texts, but I didn't need to look at them. I didn't have to. For the first time, my silence was saying everything that needed to be said. That evening, as I pulled into my driveway, the sky was already turning a deep shade of twilight. The motion sensor light on my porch flickered on, casting a warm, welcoming glow. Everything looked calm, peaceful, but there was someone sitting on my front steps. As I got closer, my heart gave a slight jolt. I recognized the silhouette. It was Chloe. She stood up quickly, brushing invisible lint off her coat. Chloe had been Ashley's best friend since the 5th grade. She had spent countless weekends at our house, baking cookies, watching movies, and giggling in sleeping bags until dawn. I hadn't seen her in years, not since she'd moved to Chicago. "Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice soft. "I'm so sorry to just show up like this." "It's all right, Chloe," I replied, unlocking the front door. "Do you want some tea?" She followed me into the kitchen, her eyes scanning the familiar walls as if they still held the echoes of their childhood laughter. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove, the silence stretching between us. I knew why she was here. "Did Ashley send you?" I asked finally, my back still to her. She didn't answer right away. Then, she said, "She's a wreck, Mrs. Miller. They lost the venue. The florist pulled out. Preston's parents are threatening to call off the whole thing." I said nothing. I just took 2 mugs from the cupboard and set them on the counter. "She's panicking," Chloe continued, her voice pleading. "She knows she messed up. She doesn't know how to fix it." "Is that why you're here?" I asked, turning to face her. "To fix it for her?" Chloe shook her head, her earnest brown eyes filled with concern. "No. I'm here to ask, is there anything she could say or do that would change your mind?" I hesitated. Was there? Could a simple "I'm sorry" erase the sting of being cast aside? Could it undo the feeling of being treated like an ATM? Of being told I wasn't welcome unless my money was? Could it silence the casual LOL that echoed in my mind? I looked at Chloe. So young. Still so full of a belief in easy fixes and happy endings. I remembered her as a little girl with pigtails, a gap in her front teeth, always trailing behind Ashley, always loyal. And I felt a pang of sadness for the woman she was trying to defend. "No," I said softly. "There isn't." Her shoulders slumped. "Not even if she apologizes?" The kettle whistled. I poured the hot water over the tea bags, the steam rising between us. I handed her a mug, my hand steady. Words are easy, Chloe, especially when people are desperate. I met her gaze. But someone who truly loves you doesn't wait until you've drawn a line in the sand to finally see you. They don't suddenly value your presence, only when your absence has a price tag. Chloe looked down into her tea, nodding slowly. A flicker of understanding crossed her face. "I get it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Even if she doesn't." She looked up at me, a genuine sadness in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Miller, for all of this." "You have nothing to be sorry for," I replied. We stood in silence for a moment, 2 women from different generations, connected by a heart. Uncomfortable truth. Sometimes love has limits. Sometimes the only way to be seen is to walk away. Chloe didn't stay long. She didn't try to argue or persuade me further. She just thanked me for the tea, gave me a gentle, hesitant hug, and disappeared back into the night. And as I closed the door, I felt like I was finally closing the door on a version of myself that had stopped serving me a long time ago. The quiet, accommodating, endlessly giving Helen was gone, and I didn't miss her at all. The wedding, as they had planned it, never happened, according to Luke, who called me a week later in a much more subdued and apologetic tone. They had scrambled to find another venue, but with such short notice, Everything was either booked or far too expensive without the money I had once promised. They ended up having a simple ceremony in the Davenport's backyard. Few weeks later, just a handful of relatives and Preston's parents. I wasn't invited. And this time, I didn't need to be. In the weeks that followed, I fell into a new rhythm. A rhythm that was dictated by my own wants and needs, not the perceived needs of others. It was strange at first, this surplus of time and mental energy. For decades, my mind had been a constant hum of logistics for other people, orthodontist appointments, tuition deadlines, grocery lists, favorite meals. Now, there was silence. A vast, open, and slightly terrifying silence. I decided to fill it. I started with small things. I bought a new coat, a bright red one that I never would have dared to wear before. I went to the library and checked out a stack of novels I'd always meant to read. I started taking long walks in the evening, rediscovering the quiet beauty of my own neighborhood. One Saturday, on a whim, I signed up for a beginner's pottery class at the local community center. The first time I sat at the wheel, the instructor, a woman with kind eyes and clay-caked hands, told me, "Don't try to force it. Just feel where the clay wants to go." It was a revelation. For my entire life, I had been forcing things. Forcing a smile when I was sad. Forcing my budget to stretch. Forcing myself to be the bigger person. But here, with my hands covered in cool, wet clay, I learned to let go. My first few creations were lopsided, clumsy bowls. But I didn't care. The feeling of the spinning wheel, of creating something out of a shapeless lump, was more satisfying than any perfectly executed plan. It was messy, and it was mine. I started having dinner with friends, old colleagues I'd only ever shared polite office chatter with. I discovered that Margaret from accounting had a wicked sense of humor, and that Susan from legal was a surprisingly fierce poker player. They saw me, Helen, not a mother or a widow or a source of support. They asked about my day, about my pottery class, about the book I was reading. It was during one of these dinners that I learned something I wished I had known decades earlier. We were talking about our children, and Margaret said, "You know, you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm." The phrase stuck with me. All my life, I had been the fire, burning brightly, endlessly, to provide warmth and light for Ashley and Luke. I had thought that was my purpose, but I had been burning myself down to embers, and I hadn't even realized it. One evening, after my pottery class, I came home to find a letter in my mailbox. Not a bill, not a circular. The cream-colored envelope with my name written on the front in Ashley's familiar, looping handwriting. I held the envelope in my hand for a long moment, feeling the weight of it. It was strange to see her handwriting again, not on a hastily scribbled birthday card, but on a formal, intentional-looking piece of mail. My first impulse was to toss it, unopened, into the recycling bin with the junk mail. A clean break. No more words. No more drama. The new Helen, the one who made lopsided pottery and wore a bright red coat, didn't need this. But curiosity is a powerful thing. And beneath the calm surface of my new life, there was still a part of me, the mother part, that wondered. I took the letter inside, placed it on the kitchen counter, and proceeded to make myself a cup of chamomile tea. I moved with a deliberate slowness, drawing out the moment, giving myself time to prepare for whatever lay inside that envelope. It felt less like a letter and more like a potential landmine. Finally, with my warm mug in hand, I sat at my kitchen table, the same spot where I had read the email that started it all. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out 2 thick pages of stationery. "Dear Mom," it began. The dear was there this time. A small, but significant, addition. "I don't know where to start, and I don't know if you'll even read this. Luke told me you've been quiet. I guess I deserve that. I know saying I'm sorry isn't enough. I know it sounds hollow now. After everything. But I'm so sorry. I took a sip of my tea. The words were what I thought I wanted to hear. But they landed without impact. Like stones tossed into a deep well. The last few months have been a disaster. The letter continued. The wedding was a joke. It was just a tense, awful party in Preston's parents' backyard. Everyone was walking on eggshells. Mrs. Davenport kept making passive-aggressive comments about family drama, and Preston just stood there and let her. The whole day felt empty, and I realized why. It was empty because you weren't there. I paused, reading that line again. It was empty because you weren't there. Was this genuine regret? Or was it just another form of guilt-tripping? A way to make her own unhappiness my responsibility? The old Helen would have felt a pang of sympathy. The new Helen just felt a weary sense of observation. Preston and I were not doing well. The fight about the money opened up all these other cracks that I had been pretending weren't there. The way he let his mother talk about you. The way he thought the solution was just to manage you with a live stream. He never understood why it was a big deal. He said, "It's just your mom." Like you were an afterthought. And the worst part is, I let him say it. I went along with it because I was so desperate to impress his family, to fit into their world. I was a coward. There it was. An admission. Not an excuse, but a raw, unflattering confession. I felt a flicker of something then. Not forgiveness, but a grudging respect for her honesty. I've been thinking a lot about my life, about how I got here, and I realized so much of it was just handed to me. Not the jobs or the promotions. I worked for those. But the foundation, the safety net, the unwavering belief that if I fell, someone would be there to catch me. That someone was always you. I never had to worry about rent, or a car breaking down, or a medical bill, because I always knew, in the back of my mind, that you would be there. I took it for granted. I took you for granted. I treated your love like it was a utility, something that would always be on, like water or electricity. And I only noticed it was gone when I turned the faucet and nothing came out. The metaphor was clumsy, but it was honest. I thought about the pottery wheel, about the formless lump of clay. She was right. I had been her utility, her foundation, her safety net. I had been everything she needed me to be. And in the process, I had forgotten to be anything for myself. I don't expect you to forgive me. The letter concluded. Not now. Maybe not ever. I wouldn't blame you. But I needed you to know that I see it now. I see you. And I hope that one day, I can be a daughter you can be proud of again. A daughter who deserves a mother like you. It was signed, simply, Ashley. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. I finished my tea. My mind quiet. The letter wasn't a solution. It wasn't a magic wand that could erase the hurt or instantly mend the fractured bond between us. But it was something. It was a start. It was the sound of a single stone being placed back onto a foundation that had crumbled. I didn't reply. Not that day. Or the next. The letter sat on my counter. A silent presence in my quiet house. It was a question mark. And I didn't have the answer yet. A few weeks later, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. But it was local. I answered cautiously. Hello? Helen? It's Chloe. I was surprised. Chloe. Hello. Is everything all right? Yes. Everything's fine. She said quickly. I'm in town for the weekend, visiting my parents. I was wondering if you'd be free for a cup of coffee. No agendas. Promise. Just me. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to decline, to keep my new, peaceful world sealed off from anything related to Ashley. But I had always liked Chloe, and her promise of no agendas felt sincere. All right, I said. When and where? We met at a small cafe downtown. The The same one where David had taken me for lunch what felt like a lifetime ago. Chloe looked different. More tired, perhaps, but also more settled in her own skin. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, wrapping her hands around her mug. "Of course," I replied. "How have you been?" We talked for a while about her job in Chicago, her parents, the simple pleasantries of catching up. She didn't mention Ashley once. Finally, as we were finishing our coffee, she looked at me directly. "Ashley's been going to therapy," she said softly. I nodded, not surprised. She mentioned it in her letter. "She reads it to me sometimes," Chloe said. "The letter. She keeps a copy. She's trying." "Helen. She really is. She's trying to untangle all the knots inside her." She paused. She and Preston broke up. For good this time. I absorbed this piece of information silently. I felt no satisfaction. No sense of victory. Just a quiet sadness for the mess my daughter had made of her life. "She sold the engagement ring," Chloe continued. "She sent a check to the venue and the caterer to pay back their lost deposits. She didn't tell you because she didn't want you to think she was trying to buy her way back. She just wanted to make it right." I looked out the window at the people passing by on the street, each one living their own complicated story. Making things right. It was so much harder than making them wrong. "I'm not here to ask you to call her," Chloe said, as if reading my mind. "I'm just here as her friend. And as your friend, too, I hope. And I wanted you to know that she's not the same person she was 6 months ago. Grief and shame, they change people." We sat in a comfortable silence for a moment. Her visit wasn't a mission. It was a report. An update from a battlefield I had long since departed. "Thank you for telling me, Chloe," I said. And I meant it. As I drove home, her words echoed in my mind. Grief and shame change people. I had been changed by my own grief, my own quiet shame. It had hardened me, but it had also broken me open, forced me to rebuild myself into someone stronger, someone more whole. Perhaps the same was happening to Ashley. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I walked over to the old photo albums on my bookshelf. I pulled one out, the one from Ashley's high school years. I saw pictures of her with her braces and awkward haircut, grinning at the camera. Pictures of her and Chloe at the state fair, covered in powdered sugar from a funnel cake. Pictures of her on graduation day, her face bright with a future that seemed limitless. I saw the girl I had raised, not the woman who had hurt me. I saw the love, the history, the shared laughter that existed long before Preston and the Davenports and the disastrous wedding plans. The anger was gone. The hurt had faded to a dull ache, like a phantom limb. What was left was a vast, complicated sadness. And beneath that sadness, tiny, resilient flicker of love. It was not the all-consuming, self-sacrificing fire it once was. It was a pilot light, small, steady, and waiting. I closed the album and put it back on the shelf. I still didn't know what to do. I still didn't have the answers. But for the first time, I felt like I might be ready to start looking for them. The next day was Saturday, the day of my pottery class. I walked in and took my usual seat at the wheel. The instructor, Maria, smiled at me. "Ready to get your hands dirty, Helen?" "Always." I smiled back. Today, we were learning to make pitchers. It was a more complex form, requiring not just a vessel, but a spout and a handle. It required balance. My first attempt collapsed into a sad, wet heap. My second was lopsided, the spout looking more like a grimace. Maria came over. "You're thinking too much," she said gently. "You're trying to make all the pieces at once. Just focus on the body first. Make a strong, centered cylinder. The rest will follow." Her words resonated deep within me. Make a strong, centered cylinder. That's what I had been doing for the past few months. I had been focusing on myself, on building a strong, centered core. I had been so focused on my own form that I had forgotten about the other pieces. I took a deep breath, centered a new lump of clay on the wheel, and started again. This time, I didn't think about the spout or the handle. I just focused on my hands, on the pressure and the pull, on creating a tall, even, balanced shape. And it worked. The cylinder rose up, strong and true. Only then did I gently shape the spout. And only after that did I pull the handle and attach it to the side. The result wasn't perfect. It was a little rustic, a little uneven, but it was whole. It was balanced. It was a vessel capable of both holding and pouring. I looked at the pitcher, my hands covered in clay, and I knew. The decision didn't come like a lightning bolt. It arrived quietly, like the slow dawn after a long night. It settled not in my head, but in my hands, as I held the damp, imperfect pitcher I had made. It was a tangible representation of my own rebuilding. I had been a vessel, emptied and discarded. I had spent months reinforcing my own walls, making sure I was strong enough to stand on my own. And now, I was. The pitcher wasn't just a container. It was designed to give. But it could only give what it held inside. And it could only pour from a position of balance. I realized that my silence, which had started as a necessary shield, had served its purpose. It had given me the space to heal, and Ashley the space to confront the consequences of her actions. Continuing that silence indefinitely wouldn't be an act of strength anymore. It would be an act of fear. Fear of being hurt again. Fear of slipping back into old patterns. But I wasn't the old Helen anymore. I knew my own worth. And that knowledge was my armor. When I got home from class, I walked over to the kitchen counter where Ashley's letter still sat. I picked it up and read it one more time. The words hadn't changed, but my perception of them had. I no longer saw them as a desperate plea or a calculated apology. I saw them as a testament to another person's painful, messy journey of self-discovery. A journey that, in a strange way, mirrored my own. We had both been broken open. We were both trying to put ourselves back together. I still didn't call her. It wasn't time for a conversation yet. Words could be messy. Emotions could run high. I needed something more deliberate. I went to my desk and pulled out a simple card and a pen. I thought for a long time about what to write. A single sentence. Something that acknowledged her effort without promising a full pardon. Something that opened a door. Just a crack. Without flinging it wide open. Finally, I wrote, "I'm glad you're finding your way." I sealed it in an envelope, addressed it to her apartment, and put a stamp on it. The next morning, on my way to work, I dropped it in a mailbox. The metallic clink as it fell inside felt small, but significant. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reunion. It was a single, quiet signal. An acknowledgement. I hear you. Life continued its new, peaceful rhythm. I went to work. I met my friends for dinner. And I spent my Saturdays at the pottery studio. My shelves at home began to fill with my creations. A collection of mismatched mugs. A series of small, colorful bowls. And the slightly lopsided pitcher, which I used for fresh flowers. Each piece was a reminder of my own resilience. About a week after I sent the card, Luke called me. His voice was different from the last time we had spoken in person. The frantic frustration was gone, replaced by a quiet, hesitant respect. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Just calling to check in." "Hello, Luke. I'm doing well," I said, my voice warm and calm. There was an awkward pause. "Ash got your card," he said. "She called me, crying, but in a good way, I think." "I'm glad," I said simply. Another pause. Then, the words he had probably been practicing came out in a rush. "Mom, I'm so sorry. For that night. For what I said. I was a jerk. I was so caught up in trying to fix things for Ash that I didn't even stop to think about how you were feeling. I was wrong. Completely wrong. His apology was sincere. I could hear it in his voice. It was the sound of a good man realizing he had failed to be one. Thank you for saying that, Luke. It means a lot to me. I miss you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah and we miss having you over for dinner. Things feel off. I miss you too, I said, and the truth of it surprised me. I had been so focused on my own healing that I hadn't realized how much I missed the easy, uncomplicated love of my son. Could we maybe have dinner soon? Just us? No agendas. Just dinner. He used the same words Chloe had. No agendas. It seemed to be the new family motto. A recognition that relationships couldn't be built on expectations and demands. I'd like that very much, Luke. We met the following Friday at a quiet neighborhood restaurant. He was nervous at first, but we fell into an easy rhythm, talking about his students, my pottery, Sarah's new garden. We didn't talk about Ashley or the wedding. We didn't need to. We were rebuilding our own bridge, one quiet conversation at a time. As we were leaving, he gave me a hug, a real one. That felt like coming home. I love you, Mom, he said. I love you too, son, I replied. Healing, I was learning, wasn't a single event. It was a series of small, quiet moments. A card sent, an apology given, a dinner shared. A month later, as the leaves were beginning to turn shades of gold and crimson, I received another letter. This one was from a law firm. My heart seized for a moment, my mind instantly jumping to the worst possible conclusions. I opened it with trembling fingers. It was a copy of a court filing, a petition for dissolution of marriage. Ashley Miller Davenport versus Preston Davenport. Tucked inside was a short, handwritten note from Ashley. I thought you should know. It's official. I'm moving into a small apartment downtown next month. I'm just Ashley Miller again. Feels right. There was no request, no question. It was just information. An update. It was her way of showing me, not just telling me, that she was changing. She was disentangling herself from the life and the values that had caused so much pain. She was becoming her own person again. I put the letter down and felt a profound sense of release. It wasn't just about her and Preston. It was about the closing of a chapter that had been defined by wealth, status, and the desperate need for approval. That Saturday at the studio, I felt a new sense of purpose. I decided to make a full dinnerware set. Plates, bowls, mugs. Enough for a family. I didn't know who would sit at the table, or when. But the act of creating it felt like an act of faith. A belief in the possibility of future gatherings, of shared meals, of a family, however changed, coming together again. As I worked, my mind drifted. I thought about forgiveness. I had always thought of it as a gift you give to someone else. Pardon. A clean slate. But now I realized it was something else entirely. It wasn't about erasing the past. The past was indelible. It was about accepting the past for what it was, and then choosing not to let it define the future. It was about untethering yourself from the anger and resentment that kept you anchored to the pain. Forgiveness, I was beginning to understand, was a gift you give to yourself. The holidays were approaching. Thanksgiving, then Christmas. The seasons of forced family cheer that I had always dreaded. Last year, it had been a quiet, lonely affair. This year, I wasn't sure what it would be. Luke and Sarah invited me for Thanksgiving. No pressure, Mom, he'd said. But we'd love to have you. I accepted immediately. The day was simple and beautiful. We cooked together. The kitchen filled with the scent of turkey and pumpkin pie. We talked and laughed. There was an empty seat at the table, an unspoken absence that we all felt. But it wasn't a sad absence. It was just A space. A space that held the possibility of being filled one day. In early December, I was finishing the last of the dinnerware set. I had glazed them in a deep, calming blue. They were sitting on the shelf. Complete. Beautiful family of ceramic pieces. Each one was unique, slightly imperfect, but they belonged together. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I had a feeling I knew who it was. I took a deep breath, wiped the last of the clay from my hands, and answered. Hello? Hi, Mom. It was Ashley's voice. It was hesitant, fragile, like a fawn testing the ice. Hello, Ashley, I said, my own voice calm and even. There was a long silence. I could hear her take a shaky breath on the other end. I know this is a lot to ask. She began, her voice small. And please say no if you want to. There's no pressure. But I was wondering, what are you doing for Christmas? I looked at the set of blue plates on my shelf. I thought of the empty chair at Thanksgiving. I thought of the lopsided pitcher, the strong cylinder, the power of balance. I thought of the long, painful journey we had both been on, separately, to find our way back. The answer was there, clear and simple. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing to move forward. I was hoping, I said, a small smile forming on my lips, that you'd come over. I'm making dinner. The silence on the other end of the line was so profound I thought for a moment she had hung up. I could hear a faint, muffled sound, and I realized with a start that she was crying. It wasn't the frantic, hysterical sobbing I had heard in her voicemails months ago. This was a quiet, choked sound of pure, unadulterated relief. Really? She finally whispered, her voice thick and broken. You'd want me to? I have a new set of plates I'd like to use. I said simply. It was my way of saying everything without having to say it all. It meant, I have rebuilt. I have made space. You are welcome in this new space I have created. Okay. She breathed. Okay. Mom. I'll be there. We didn't make small talk. We didn't discuss logistics or what she should bring. We just hung up. The conversation was fragile. A delicate piece of glass we had both managed to hold without shattering. Pushing it further would have been a risk neither of us was ready to take. The days leading up to Christmas were a strange mix of anticipation and anxiety. A part of me, the cautious, newly armored part, worried. Would it be awkward? Would old resentments bubble to the surface? Would we fall back into the old, painful dance of her casual thoughtlessness and my silent martyrdom? I had to consciously remind myself that neither of us was the same person we had been a year ago. We had both been through the fire. We were scarred. Yet, but we were also stronger. Luke called a few days before Christmas. Ash told me she's coming to your place, he said. A note of wonder in his voice. That's great, Mom. She is. I confirmed. Sarah and I would love to come too. That's okay. To be there with you both. Of course, I said, my heart swelling. The more, the merrier. My little house, which had felt so empty for so long, was going to be full again. On Christmas morning, I woke up early. The house was quiet. A light snow had fallen overnight, blanketing the world in a pristine layer of white. It felt like a clean slate. I started cooking, the familiar motions calming my nerves. I roasted a chicken, made mashed potatoes, and baked the apple pie that had always been Ashley's favorite. At noon, Luke and Sarah arrive, their arms full of presents and a bottle of sparkling cider. The house instantly felt warmer, filled with their easy laughter and cheerful chatter. We put on some old Christmas music, and for a few hours, it felt like any other holiday from years past. At 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang. My heart gave a sharp thud. Luke shot me a supportive look and squeezed my shoulder before I went to the door. I opened it, and there she was, Ashley stood on my porch, looking smaller than I remembered. She was wearing a simple sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back, her face free of the heavy makeup she used to wear. She was holding a single poinsettia in a pot. Her eyes, when they met mine, were filled with 100 different emotions: fear, hope, shame, and a desperate, yearning love. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Hello, Ashley," I replied, stepping back to let her in. "Welcome home." The words hung in the air between us. Welcome home. It was the first time I had said them to her in a very, very long time. She stepped inside, her movements hesitant, as if she were a guest in a stranger's house. She saw Luke and Sarah, and a small, watery smile touched her lips. Luke went over and gave her a long, fierce hug. "Merry Christmas," he murmured. The first hour was undeniably awkward. We made small talk. Ashley commented on my red coat hanging by the door. I thanked her for the beautiful poinsettia. We talked about the weather. It was a delicate dance around the enormous, unspoken thing that filled the room. We were all so terrified of taking a wrong step, of shattering the fragile peace we had managed to build. Dinner was what saved us. The simple act of passing bowls and filling plates created a sense of normalcy. It gave us something to do with our hands, a reason to look at the food instead of at each other. I had set the table with my new blue dinnerware. Ashley ran her finger over the rim of her plate, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You made these?" she asked. "I did," I said. "It's my new hobby." "They're beautiful," she said quietly. "They're not perfect, but they're beautiful." I knew what she meant. She wasn't just talking about the plates. As we ate, the conversation started to flow more naturally. Luke told a funny story about one of his students. Sarah talked about her plans for the spring garden. And slowly, tentatively, Ashley began to talk too. She talked about her new, tiny apartment, about the challenges of her job, about a funny podcast she had been listening to. She was no longer performing. There was no bravado, no attempt to impress. She was just talking, and I was just listening. After dinner, as Sarah and I were clearing the plates, Ashley followed me into the kitchen. Luke started to get up, to play his usual role of mediator, but Sarah put a hand on his arm and shook her head, giving us the space we needed. Ashley stood awkwardly by the counter, watching me rinse the dishes. "The meal was wonderful, Mom," she said. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Silence. Then, she took a deep breath. "I know I've said it in a letter, but I need to say it to your face. I'm so sorry. For the email. For the wedding. For everything. For being a terrible daughter. There's no excuse for how I treated you. It was cruel and selfish, and I will regret it for the rest of my life." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She stood there, waiting, accepting whatever my reaction would be. I turned off the water and dried my hands on a dish towel. I looked at my daughter, this woman who had caused me the deepest pain of my life, but who was also a part of my very soul. I saw the genuine remorse in her eyes. I saw the shame she carried, and I saw the brave, difficult work she had done to become a better person. "I know," I said softly. That was all. I didn't say, "I forgive you." The words still felt too big, too final. Forgiveness wasn't a switch I could flip. It was a process, and we were still in the middle of it. But in that moment, "I know" was enough. It meant, "I see your apology. I believe it. I accept it." A single tear rolled down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. She gave me a small, trembling smile. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Later, as we were sitting in the living room, exchanging the few small gifts we had bought, a comfortable quiet settled over us. It was no longer an awkward silence, but a peaceful one. The silence of a family that had weathered a terrible storm and had found its way back to a safe harbor. Battered but still afloat. Ashley handed me a small, flat, rectangular gift. "It's not much," she said. I unwrapped it. It was a framed photo. It was an old picture. One I hadn't seen in years. It was of me, much younger, sitting on the porch steps, holding a tiny baby Ashley in my arms. We were both looking at each other, and I was smiling a smile of pure, unadulterated joy. A smile from before the hardship, before the loss, before the sacrifices had piled up like stones on my back. I looked at the photo, then at the 32-year-old woman sitting across from me, and I felt the last tight knot of resentment in my heart finally, gently, unravel. The past couldn't be changed. The hurt couldn't be erased. But this, right here, was the beginning of a new future. A future built not on obligation or transaction, but on a love that was being consciously, carefully, and intentionally rebuilt. One plate, one conversation, one shared Christmas at a time. It wasn't a perfect storybook ending. It was something better. It was real. The new year arrived not with a bang, but with a quiet sense of purpose. Christmas had not been a magical fix. It hadn't instantly erased the scars or reset our relationship to a time before the hurt. Instead, it had been a single, foundational brick, carefully laid in place. Now came the slow, deliberate work of building on top of it. Ashley and I began a new, tentative routine. Once a week, usually on a Wednesday evening, we'd meet for coffee. Our first few meetings were a bit like her first visit home, stilted and cautious. We stuck to safe topics: her work, my pottery, a new show on television. We were like two diplomats from opposing countries, carefully navigating a treaty, terrified of saying the wrong thing. We never mentioned the wedding, Preston, or the infamous email. That chapter was closed, and we both implicitly understood that reopening it would do more harm than good. The change came gradually. One evening, she was telling me about a frustrating project at work, how her boss had taken credit for her idea. The old Ashley would have spun it into a dramatic tale of corporate injustice. But this Ashley just sighed, a weary look on her face. "It's just exhausting," she said, stirring her latte, trying to play a game where the rules keep changing. "I know the feeling," I said, and a flicker of our old connection, the one buried under years of resentment and pain, sparked to life. For a moment, we weren't a wounded mother and a remorseful daughter. We were just two women, commiserating about the frustrations of life. She looked up, a small, surprised smile on her face. "Yeah," she said. "I guess you do." It was in these small moments that the healing happened. It happened when she called me one Saturday, not to ask for anything, but just to tell me she tried the recipe for my apple pie, and it had been a disaster. We laughed together on the phone. A real, easy laugh that felt like a forgotten melody. It happened when I had a bad cold, and she showed up at my door with a container of homemade chicken soup, a box of tissues, and 3 magazines. She didn't stay long, respecting my need for rest, but the gesture spoke volumes. It was a quiet act of care, a mirror of the countless times I had done the same for her. It was her showing me, not just telling me, that she had learned what it meant to give without being asked. Luke and I fell back into our easy, comfortable relationship. Our weekly dinners became a cherished ritual. He would often talk about Ashley, sharing small updates with a quiet pride. "She seems happier, Mom," he'd say. "Lighter. Like she's finally comfortable in her own skin." I saw it too. The desperate need for approval that had driven her for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet self-assurance. She was still ambitious, still driven, but her focus had shifted inward. She was no longer trying to build a life that looked good on the outside. She was trying to build one that felt good on the inside. One afternoon in early spring, I was in my garden, turning over the soil for my tomato plants, when my phone rang. It was Ashley. "Hey, Mom," she said, her voice bright. "What are you up to?" "Just getting my hands dirty in the garden," I replied. "I have a weird question for you," she said. Do you still have my old sleeping bag? The purple one?" I was taken aback. "I think so. It's probably in a storage bin in the attic." "Why?" "Well," she said, and I could hear a smile in her voice. "Chloe is coming to visit next weekend, and we had this stupid, nostalgic idea of having a sleepover, like we used to, watching bad movies and eating junk food." The image was so vivid it made my heart ache with a sweet, poignant nostalgia. 2 little girls in my living room, whispering and giggling long after they were supposed to be asleep. "I'll find it for you," I said. "Thanks, Mom. And hey, maybe you could join us? For one of the bad movies." The invitation was casual, easy, with none of the desperate weight our conversations used to carry. It was a simple, genuine desire for my company. "I think I can be persuaded," I said, smiling to myself. That Friday, I pulled the dusty storage bin from the attic. Inside, beneath old photo albums and stacks of Luke's high school report cards, was the purple sleeping bag. As I pulled it out, something fell to the floor. It was a small, worn, leather-bound journal. I didn't recognize it at first. I picked it up and opened it. The first page was dated 15 years ago, just a few months after Tom had died. The handwriting was Ashley's, but it was the messy, emotional scrawl of a 17-year-old girl. "Dad's gone," it read, "and Mom is trying so hard to pretend she's okay. She smiles all the time, but her eyes are sad. She works all the time. She never buys anything for herself anymore. Last night, I heard her crying in her room when she thought I was asleep. I wanted to go in, to hug her, but I didn't know how. Feels like there's a glass wall between us now. I want my mom back. I want our family back." I sank down onto the dusty attic floor, my legs suddenly weak. I read on, page after page. It was a chronicle of her teenage grief, a pain she had hidden so well behind a mask of teenage indifference. She wrote about her guilt for needing things: new clothes, money for a school trip when she knew how hard I was working. She wrote about her anger at her father for leaving us, and her fear for our future. She had never told me any of this. In my own all-consuming grief, in my frantic efforts to keep us afloat, I had seen her teenage moodiness not as a symptom of her pain, but as another burden to bear. I had been so focused on providing for her that I had failed to see her. The glass wall she described, I had helped build it. I had spent the last year coming to terms with her failures as a daughter. I had never, not once, considered my own failures as a mother. I had given them everything I could, except, perhaps, the one thing they needed most: my own vulnerability. I had shown them my strength, my resilience, my ability to sacrifice. I had never shown them my grief, my fear, my weakness. I had never let them in. The story I had been telling myself for the last year was one of my righteous, thankless sacrifice. But the truth, I was now realizing, was far more complex. Our family hadn't just been broken by her selfishness. It had been broken by our shared, unspoken grief. We were all just trying to survive, and we had built walls to do it, not realizing we were walling each other out. When Ashley came to pick up the sleeping bag, I had the journal sitting on the kitchen table. "I found this," I said quietly, pushing it towards her. She looked at it, her face paling as she recognized it. "Oh God," she whispered. "I thought I'd lost that years ago." She looked at me, her eyes wide with apprehension. Did you read it?" I nodded. "I did." She sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "I'm so embarrassed," she mumbled. "I was such a dramatic teenager. You were a grieving teenager. I corrected her gently. And I was a grieving mother. And neither of us knew how to talk to the other. She looked up, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't want to be another problem for you to solve. Oh, Ashley, I said, my own voice thick with emotion. You were never a problem. But I never let you see that I was struggling, too. I thought I had to be strong for you and Luke. I thought that was my job. I didn't realize that by hiding my own pain, I was teaching you to hide yours. In that moment, the last piece of the wall between us crumbled. It wasn't about blame or forgiveness anymore. It was about understanding. A deep, profound, and painful understanding of our shared history. I reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers curled around mine, clinging to me. We were all just doing the best we could. I said, I know. She whispered. That night, after Chloe had arrived and they had laid out their sleeping bags in the living room, I came downstairs with a bowl of popcorn. They were watching a cheesy romantic comedy from the 90s, the kind we had all seen a dozen times. Room for one more? I asked. Ashley smiled. A real, radiant smile that reached all the way to her eyes. She patted the spot on the couch next to her. Always, Mom, she said. There's always room for you. I sat down, sinking into the cushions between my daughter and the girl who was like a second daughter to me. I watched the flickering screen, listening to their familiar laughter, and I felt a sense of peace that was deeper and more complete than anything I had felt before. It wasn't the solitary peace of my quiet house or my pottery studio. It was the messy, noisy, beautiful peace of being part of a family that had been broken and scarred and had, against all odds, found its way back to being whole again. The following summer marked a year since the email. A year since my world had tilted on its axis. The anniversary passed without any fanfare. There was no need to mark it. We were living in a different world now. One we had built together. Brick by painful brick. One sweltering afternoon in July, I was at my pottery studio, glazing a set of large serving platters. The studio had become my sanctuary, a place of creation and quiet reflection. My skills had improved dramatically. My pieces were no longer lopsided. They were centered and strong, but they still retained a handmade, imperfect quality that I loved. They were, thought, a lot like me. My phone buzzed with a text from Ashley. It was a photo. In it, she and Luke were standing side by side in what looked like a park, both of them grinning at the camera. Luke had his arm around her shoulders. The caption read, "Sibling hike. Miss you." I smiled at the photo. The ease between them was palpable. The strain that had existed for so long, with Luke caught in the middle of our conflict, had vanished. Seeing them happy, together, was a gift. I texted back a photo of the platter I was working on, with the caption, "Miss you too. Working on something for our next family dinner." It had become our new language. A language of shared moments, of quiet connections, of looking forward instead of back. Later that week, I received a call from David, my boss. "Helen," he said, his voice warm. "I'm calling with some news. I'm retiring at the end of the year." "Oh, David," I said, a genuine pang of sadness hitting me. "The office won't be the same without you." "Well, that's actually what I'm calling about," he said. "The partners and I have been discussing my replacement. We'd like to offer you the position, general manager." I was stunned into silence. Me? General manager? I was the office manager. The quiet, reliable woman who made sure the coffee was stocked and the contracts were filed. I was part of the furniture, the stable background against which other, more important things happened. "Helen? Are you there?" I'm here," I stammered. "David, I don't know what to say. I don't have the experience for a role like that." Nonsense, he said firmly. You have 20 years of experience. You know this firm and its people better than anyone. You're organized. You're respected. And you're the calmest person I know in a crisis. You've been running this place for years. Helen, you just haven't had the title or the salary to go with it. His words struck a deep chord within me. You've been doing the work. You just haven't had the title. It was the story of my life. I had been a CEO of my household, a grief counselor, a financial planner, a full-time mother, all without the title or the recognition. I had managed a family through its darkest days. I could certainly manage an office. I would be honored to accept, I said, my voice filled with a confidence that surprised even me. That night, I invited Luke and Ashley over for a celebratory dinner. I told them my news, and they erupted in cheers. Ashley jumped up and threw her arms around me, hugging me tightly. Mom, that's amazing, she squealed. I'm so proud of you. Luke beamed. It's about time they recognize what you're worth. Sitting there, between my two children, I felt a sense of fulfillment that was entirely my own. This wasn't something I had done for them. This was something I had earned for myself. It was a validation not of my sacrifices as a mother, but of my skills and my value as a person. A few months later, on a crisp autumn Saturday, we were all at my house. Luke and Sarah were helping me in the garden, winterizing my plants. Ashley was in the kitchen, attempting to bake my apple pie again. The house was filled with the comfortable, chaotic sounds of a family. I was on the back porch, taking a break and watching them, when Ashley came out, wiping flour on her jeans. She sat down in the wicker chair next to me. It smells good in there, I said. Let's hope it tastes good this time. She laughed. We sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, watching Luke wrestle with a stubborn rose bush. You know, Ashley said quietly, her gaze distant. I was thinking about the wedding the other day. My body tensed slightly, a reflex I couldn't control. Not the one that didn't happen, she clarified quickly, sensing my discomfort. But a wedding, in general. She turned to look at me. If I ever get married again, it's not going to be in a big, fancy hall. It's going to be small. Maybe, right here, in this backyard. I looked out at my small, simple yard, at the half-dead tomato plants and the struggling rose bush. It was imperfect and messy, but it was ours. It was a place of healing. And you know who will be the first person on the guest list? She continued, her eyes locking with mine. The very first invitation I sent? I knew the answer, but I needed to hear her say it. You, Mom, she said, her voice soft but certain. You'll be my maid of honor, if you'll have me. Tears welled in my eyes, not tears of pain or sadness, but tears of a profound, overwhelming joy. It was the closing of a circle. It was the final, beautiful, healing piece of the puzzle falling into place. I reached out and took her hand, the one dusted with flour. I would be honored, I whispered. She squeezed my hand, a radiant smile spreading across her face. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I stood in my quiet kitchen. The remnants of our day were all around me, a few dirty dishes in the sink, the lingering scent of apple pie, a smear of flour on the counter. My house was no longer a silent, empty space. It was a home, a place filled with love, laughter, and the promise of new beginnings. I picked up the first lopsided picture I had ever made, the one I kept on my windowsill. I ran my fingers over its uneven surface. It was a reminder of where I had been, a broken, empty vessel. But now, it was full of self-respect, full of a love that was balanced and healthy, and full of a quiet, unshakable peace. I had learned that you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is to tend to your own flame first. to make it burn so brightly and so steadily that it provides light and warmth for everyone around you, without ever consuming you. The strongest love I had discovered was the love you finally decide to give to yourself. And from that love, everything else could grow.